Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last update. I've been working on menus, doing bug fixes, adding lots of content, and a lot of it has been quite boring, which is why I haven't bothered posting about it. But today I wanted to take a deep dive into one of the tracks that I've been working on and doing player testing and refining the map from each playtest. Essentially, the problem that I have is that players don't always notice which way to turn. And a lot of players suggest that I implement a minimap, and this is something I noticed when I made my first game, Trash TV, which was a puzzle platformer, was that users would often suggest solutions to problems they had, and they wouldn't necessarily say, I have this problem. They would say, I think you should add something in, which would sort of alleviate their problem. But you don't always want to jump to those solutions. Like a minimap would help players navigate, but ideally, players should just be able to intuitively guess which way to go. And I think that is achievable through better map design. So what we're going to do is take a look at 3 versions of the same map. And I've done player testing in between each step. And the success rate at this one particular corner has gone up dramatically. So now all players that I've tested have all succeeded in taking the corner. Whereas before, almost all of them would just drive straight off the map. Before we get into that, though, the first thing you'll notice between the first version and the second version of the map is the skybox is dramatically different. So because I'm making this game for VR, I've run into quite an awkward issue. When you're making a non-VR game and you want to do large-scale environments, you can make a skybox camera and have a shrunk-down version of your sort of background scenery, your mountains or whatever is off in the distance, and render that first and then render your sort of true scale gameplay on top of it. Now, the reason you do that is because having a large draw depth reduces some optimization that the camera can be made while rendering, and basically you get a frame rate cost if you don't do this miniature skybox sort of variation. However, if you're making a VR game, because you have sort of stereoscopic 3D vision, this skybox technique ends up making a sort of weird toy box sort of feel to your large-scale environments, and it just looks utterly bizarre. So because of that, I've made my draw distance much shorter. That gives me great frame rate on the Oculus Quest. But then we have the problem of objects just suddenly popping in at sort of short distances. So I've made the atmospheric fog very heavy and made it match the sky color, and this kind of helps blend things in and things just sort of come out of this haze. So with all that out of the way, let's specifically talk about this one corner. Players should turn right, but they rarely do. So when it comes to guiding the player's eye, we borrow a lot of rules from traditional art theory. People's eyes are typically drawn to movement, high contrast, other people's eyes, other people's hands, where other people are looking or pointing, as well as converging lines. I also noticed that players tend to travel downhill. So the first change I made is to make the hills on the left-hand side of the map steeper, as well as create these sort of converging lines where the silhouette of the skyline, the hill, and the road surface all sort of swoop towards the right, as well as putting this arch structure on the right-hand side. And this was enough to see immediate improvements. Players typically still missed the corner on the first try, but they certainly knew that they were supposed to turn right, but usually too late to make the turning. So back when I was designing Trash TV, one of the things I noticed was that sometimes the puzzle wasn't too hard in itself. Just the ideas that it required hadn't been sort of ingrained enough previously, and that you could add a puzzle before a puzzle that players were struggling with. That was sort of like a softer version of it, and that would imprint certain ideas into the player's mind, and then they would be able to solve it. So with this, I was hoping that, given that the player starts and races underneath the arch structure right at the beginning of the map, and then also this bone structure, that the idea of sort of driving underneath arched structures would sort of be ingrained. So rather than looking to reinforce the idea, I took another look at the composition of this sort of scene, and I've changed, again, the sort of mountain range, made it a little bit steeper, made the whole thing swoop more towards the right. The arch structure has been rotated a little bit to make it more open, and I've removed this sort of flora that was sort of sitting in front of it, which I think was obstructing players' sort of desired path forward. Now, if we take a look at the final version, all players have succeeded not just in knowing that they need to turn right, but also knowing far enough in advance to actually be able to navigate the corner with ease. So hopefully you found this video instructive, and really the sort of takeaway that I want to sort of get across is that when players articulate a solution, you really need to hear that they are saying that they have a problem, because it is surprising just how often players will say that they feel that the game needs a certain thing, and if you ask them if they found any sort of issues with the game, quite often they'll say no, even though why are they offering a solution to something if they don't have a problem with it? I mean, obviously, people know that you've put a lot of time and effort into it, so people can be very nervous about criticizing it. Going back to Trash TV, I found that players, at first, they said that the character sort of moved too quickly, so then I slowed it down a little bit. Then I had players, some saying that the character moved too slowly, some saying that it moved too quick. So then I sort of tried to address that head on and introduced sort of difficulty levels, which would affect the whole time scale of the game, so that the users who felt it was too quick could pick easy and the whole game was slowed down. But really all of that was not understanding the problem that they were actually having, which was the character didn't really have any inertia or acceleration. So for fine-grained sort of little movements, they couldn't really implement that. And then for moments they wanted to execute something quickly, they also didn't really have a way of doing that. But it was quite a hard problem to diagnose, because when I asked players, if they felt that the character moved too quickly at all times, they would say yes, even though actually I think the truth of it was that it was just in certain moments. And hopefully with this game, I can solve the issue of players being able to navigate intuitively rather than resorting to a map. And that's it. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. And I'll be making more videos like this where I focus on certain aspects of game making and try and give real sort of concrete, exact examples.